Welcome all. This feels so unusual, first gig in about 2 years, so I'll set a low bar for the rest of them to hit. So, two deceiving things on this slide. One is, it says lead solutions engineer, so yeah, I'm a sales guy right now, but prior to joining VMware, I spent 20 years, maybe too long, some would say, being an admin. Okay, so managing Windows devices through SCCM, Casper for Macs, and Chef and Puppet and the likes for Linux. So I've sort of been in your shoes, which sort of leads me to the next bit, which is automating and securing the Anywhere workspace. I mean, two lovely things, right, if you're a Mac admin, but fundamentally missing a key proponent of what is the workspace today and how it's evolving. And that basically comes down to, if he turns his clicker on, employee experience. So employee experience is starting to become front and center. It's actually better over here, out of the light. Front and center to everything that IT is doing. Okay, and there's a reason for that. And fundamentally, this guy summed it up really well. Hopefully you know him. But it starts off with, you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology, right? You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to go with it. And whilst Steve here sort of talks about it from a sell perspective, it's the same thing from a corporate or a company perspective, right? Part of IT and how you define your landscape for your end users starts to reflect on the talent you can acquire and how you can retain those individuals, right? So we did a survey last year where customers were interviewed, and they all say that technology is now a major influencer in attracting talent. And you'll see on the graph on the right, it varies a little bit between you being a millennial or a Generation X, but fundamentally the majority of people choose a company now not just based upon salary and job, but what devices am I going to be able to use? I know that when I went to VMware, one of the massive things was I'd been tied to a desk. I'd had to use a Windows machine, which I absolutely hate with a passion, even though I've been doing it for 20 years. And I got the freedom of choice to choose an iPhone and instead of a BlackBerry and a Mac instead of a Lenovo laptop. And so it's becoming a big thing these days. So at VMware, we've grown up managing devices, but managing devices somewhat, especially the mobile space, is a bit more of a commodity thing these days. And what we're starting to do now is realize that we need to empower IT, yourselves, to define and manage that user experience. And it comes down to a bunch of different services that go beyond just MDM, okay? So, yeah, MDM is a big thing, and we can go through doing the onboarding and, just like everyone else, we just leverage a bunch of technologies like DP from Apple. Then start layering a consistent user experience across all of the devices that we're going to have under management. So we're not just talking about Mac and iOS. We want to give you the same capabilities and tools as an admin to manage Windows, Linux, Mac, iOS, Android, Chrome, Oculus. You choose your device. But present a consistent user experience to all of those. So I can hop from one device to another, and I can still access all my apps in a unified catalog with secure single sign-on, but then go a step further. Use that as a mechanism to do corporate communications, push notifications to end users. When Office 365 becomes Office 364, we can just send an email, a push notification out to all those devices to let them know email's down. So in doing so, we're giving the user all these self-service capabilities, but behind the scenes, we can start analyzing the behaviors of users. So as companies pivot from more from SLAs to net promoter scores, we can start contributing to that through surveys that we can do proactively, and we'll cover that in a little bit. So the employee experience some will say, oh, well, the first day I started, I went in and chose my laptop. But does your employee engagement start on your first day? Or does your employee engagement start on the first time a user touches your brand in an interview? Okay? That's where we're going, and that's what we're doing with Intelligent Hub now. So as well as it being your single sign-on and your access to your enterprise store, you can actually have employees engage with you as soon as they leave the interview room. So you can give them a code, they get the Intelligent Hub app, they can start seeing their contract, they can e-sign their contract, they can start choosing their devices before they even join you, and actually get maybe access to things like benefits portals to go and select, what pension am I going to be using, and what other benefits do I want in terms of leave and such like. So the engagement process is happening earlier on. And what this starts to lead to is a significant reduction in ghosting. So employees not turning up for their first day, right? Because maybe their engagement with you has been substandard and not what they expected. But then it also goes into the actual onboarding process. We transition from a BYO device to partially managed. We light up the laptop. We start giving them access to all the same services across all the different devices that they may choose. And in some cases it might be a VDI, a Mac, and an iPhone, for instance. We can start life cycling that employee and giving them access and measuring the behavior that they start adopting on those devices, all the way through to when they actually leave the organization. Okay, and that's where, we can wipe the devices or return them to pools. So it's becoming a really critical path for everyone. And, the ghosting thing isn't just about when a user first joins the company. I've been speaking to organizations that within 2 weeks of someone starting, 50% of employees leave the company because they're still waiting to be enabled from a technology perspective. And it's a scary thought in this day and age. Who'd have thought it'd be that hard to give someone a laptop or a device and get them productive? And if that's how the organization is there, does that bleed through into everything else they do? So, users onboarded. This slide's out of date, I just noticed. Users onboarded, but typically now they're going to be working remotely everywhere. So how can we enable you to support them and give them that stellar support experience? Maybe it's not you, maybe it's the help desk. Sorry, did you an injustice. But here you don't have to be a Workspace ONE managed device to get this. This is available to devices that are managed by another product, but we can give you a remoting experience. So you can remote into a user's desktop, be it Android, iOS, Windows CE, if you've got any of those anymore, Win 10 Mac, and now Linux actually we do as well, which marries up. We can manage all of those devices, so hence we can actually support them as well. You as an admin can remote in, you can get remote shell, you can access the registry or the file system or terminal remotely. There's a two-factor authentication handshake between you and the user to make sure that their privacy is not invaded by someone just remotely connecting and shadowing them for the whole day. But fundamentally, it just empowers you now that everyone is disparately working across the internet to be able to support them wherever they are. And then I talked about how we want to track and measure those net promoter scores and KPIs that are within an organization. And so, getting employee feedback is fundamental for you to be able to track and measure that and understand how you're performing and the service that you're delivering, the quality of that. So, within Intelligent Hub, I said it was like a notification system, but we can also push things like surveys out. So, let's take the free one like SurveyMonkey, right? You can send out a small survey, you still got to collate that, and maybe you want to correlate that with a bunch of other internal metrics. So we're starting to do that now through Intelligent Hub, be able to say, we haven't been using this app for a while, do you still need it? Or maybe through the metrics that we're capturing, so we're doing real-time telemetry on the devices, we can capture app crashes, we can capture startup times, of devices and launch times of applications, and start to correlate that with other events in the ecosystem. So we can see, maybe I deployed a piece of software and now the launch times of that or the crashes have gone up, and we can start feeding that back into this loop and maybe automatically remediating it, which we'll come to later on. But then we can do subjective surveys off the back of that to capture, did we perform well in resolving that? And that all comes through a digital employee management solution. So through that, we are surfacing to you all of these metrics. But we're doing smarts behind the scenes. So I'll talk a little bit when we get to security about the engines that we use behind the scenes. We're able to ingest a lot of different data points and start to correlate them. We trend them over the time, so the reporting that we're doing within the system isn't just real time, it can be historic as well. So, if you have a day zero vulnerability and your boss comes to you and says, we need to patch all of these devices, all 20, 100,000 of them by Saturday, you can look at the historic trend and go, well, best will in the world, I'm only going to get it done in 2 weeks because there's a bunch of them locked in a drawer somewhere. So the metrics start to help you predict, but also historically capture the performance of the devices, the users, and yourselves over time. And we surface that all in the employee experience management console. And there's a bunch of machine learning that happens in the background that starts to correlate what known good is. So over time, as we build up data, we'll know that maybe on a Friday and a Monday, things behave differently to how they do on a Tuesday to Thursday. And so when stuff starts to drift out of the norm, we can proactively take actions against those deltas. So that's my piece on employee experience. I think it's really critical because the other bit that it sort of does is, and I see this with a lot of customers that I go to, they talk employee experience, it's priority number one. And then you sit through a whole strategy day and employee experience isn't even mentioned until the last 10 minutes of a whole day, because the rest of the time they just pivot. As soon as they've said priority number one is employee experience, it's just about the technology. And people are emotional about technology, right? I remember, I've had admins come to me with RFIs, and I've got a checklist of 200 things that are features that I need. And when the answers come out, and it's not the answer that they expect it to be, the feature list changes until the number comes out of the number they want to see. So it's not all about features. Let's start thinking a bit more strategically. So security, we've talked about onboarding all these devices and the user. The user fundamentally isn't sitting in Office anymore, okay? And it's been the way for, in some organizations for a long time, more so now. So security is starting to come front and center. And what we're seeing is this pivot towards zero trust security, okay? This was a concept founded by Forrester that fundamentally sits upon 5 key pillars. One is access control, okay? How do I control access to the resources now that they're not all on-prem? Now that I don't necessarily have to VPN in per device VPN to access these resources because we're moving, most organizations are moving to the cloud. Okay, so we need to be able to secure that data and the data on the device, obviously. And then start adopting a least privileged access. So, historically I know a lot of users end up being admins on their Mac, but when I work with financial institutions, that's an absolute no-go unless you're a developer and you're an exception, in which case you lose access to certain other things by virtue of you having admin rights. Most users now we're actually deploying in those environments as standard users and using the power that we have in the MDM solution to elevate privileges where necessary to do the deployments, the patching, etc. Authentication mechanisms are changing. Okay, we've had the likes of the FIDO2 type authentication mechanisms, Windows Hello, Face ID, YubiKeys. Our authentication solutions handle all those 2FAs as well as a sort of, I call them legacy nearly, RSA We actually have in the hub our own built-in Verify app for doing 2FA, so you don't need an additional app. It's all baked into the enterprise catalog that you have. And then we need to be like re-evaluating the compliance that we use in the environment, because fundamentally we're never trusting a device. Okay, we always want to re-evaluate the elements that go into authentication, be it the user or be it the device. And we can do that through analytics. And then the final bit on that is like risk scoring, which we'll cover in a tick. So understanding the risk posed by that user and the device. So the first bit, like when we talk about identity, is how do we do the authentication? So Workspace ONE, a couple of different things in there, but one of them is Workspace ONE Access, which is our identity provider. So, the equivalent to the likes of Okta, ADFS, etc. And in there, as you'd expect, we do a great job of integrating with our UEM solution. So there's like 3 elements here. One is understanding the device compliance, and we can feed that into the authentication stream. So, are you coming from a device that's managed or unmanaged? And maybe we treat you differently based upon how you come in there. Maybe we treat you differently from where the device is residing. Is it on a public network or is it on an internal trusted network? These days, nothing's really trusted. It's Wi-Fi, right? So you'll be hearing about that later, I guess, by someone more knowledgeable at least. But understanding device compliance, we can get real-time telemetry from that device, feed it in to that authentication, as well as then the identity context, so integrating with multiple directory providers, understanding the strength of authentication that's needed. It might be a device that I enrolled when during enrollment I want to do 2FA, but subsequently I don't really want to throw 2FA prompts. I just want to move to certificate-based authentication, okay? Because we can lifecycle the certificate on the device. Or maybe for certain apps, like when I go into an HR system, I might want to elevate the rights. I'm going into Workday, I'm going to view employee information. Therefore, maybe I want a 2FA that, but I don't want a 2FA hitting the company intranet site. So we can start being super adaptive with the identity and context. And then the final piece is user behavior, which is a very subjective thing. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that on the slide after this one. So I just want to give you the background on how user risk plays into all of this, because I talked about this being a massive security ecosystem, and there's so many different moving parts. You just saw devices and users, and fundamentally users are just super variable in nature anyway. So we have an intelligence engine. So it's not AI, it's machine learning behind the scenes. The beauty of it is it's enabled to ingest a bunch of different data points. So we've got the analytics that come from UEM. Is your device compliant? Is file vault enabled? Is firewall enabled? Is disk encrypted? So file vault. And we can measure all those in real time. And if the device has a change in its security state, we can real-time notify the UEM solution of that. And as soon as there's any change in that data set coming in, we can effect a change through the intelligence engine. We ingest CVE feed from NIST. So we're getting real-time updates on the vulnerabilities that are out there in the world for Windows, for Mac, for iOS, for Android. And we can start correlating those automatically back to the patches that resolve those, and actually through the automation engine start automatically deploying those based on severity. Okay, so we can remove some of that overhead that you have. Fundamentally, the platforms that we're talking about these days have grown up a bit more when it comes to patches. You can pretty much go with the evergreen strategy with minimal risk, less risk than staying unpatched, shall we say. Then we can start doing these analytics on identity. Okay, so how do I behave as a user? And that's the next bit that we'll just talk about. We're also getting those app crash logs, the performance of the system, and then threat analytics from our own AV product like Carbon Black. But we have an API, which we call the Trust Network, that providers like Netscope, who do CASB solutions, Symantec, McAfee, Lookout can all use to provide data and telemetry from their agents into us, flag devices as non-compliant so that we can quarantine them or push scripts or apps or profiles back out to the device to get that device back in a compliant state. There's a wealth of data that's coming in real time, including sensors, which we'll talk about later. And we can surface all this through dashboards, and real-time reporting with that historic trending. And then with each of those reports that you create, you can just click a button called Action. And you can say, right, for this criteria of device is not compliant or device doesn't have X present, I want you to go through and remediate through some automation. And then the final bit is the risk scoring that comes out the back for the user as well. And that risk analytics takes into account a number of factors. And these are sort of some like categories that we typically see, like not to pigeonhole people, but I love being a laggard basically on OS updates. It always just sounds a funny term, but you know, if I'm a person that doesn't patch my device up very often, then I pose more of a threat than someone that stays evergreen and hits, you know, the patch and downloads it at 6 o'clock when Apple releases it. Whether your device is hoarding applications, so if I habitually download stuff all the time, then chances are at some point I'm going to get hit more so than someone who literally just uses a handful of apps and rarely downloads anything. And then like things like login risks. Do I suddenly start logging in from different places repeatedly? Am I doing Superman logins from one part of the world and another one? We can take all of that into account and build a risk score for that user. And in doing so, we can say, Howard, yeah, he's a bit of a dodgy guy at the moment. He's been doing a few naughty things. So actually what we're going to do for every authentication that we do, instead of him just getting away with like a certificate or just a username and password, we're going to throw up a second factor of authentication. A, that helps us with security. B, makes Howard think a little bit more about what he did because he's had to experience a little bit of pain, and he'll be questioning what he's been doing, and hopefully that will change behavior over time as well. He said confidently. What are we doing for time? 20. And then, you know, once we've got the user logged in and authenticated, they're going to want to access a bunch of resources, right? And more stuff is pivoting away from the traditional data center. And we're seeing it being, you know, SaaS hosted, whether it's your Office 365s, whether it's your YouTubes or your Workdays of the world. They're all starting to move away from having any on-prem presence, which, you know, for a lot of the banks and stuff, it's going to be a bit of a sticking point. It seems to be a bit of a sticking point. And so the traditional VPN as we know it is starting to disappear. So we still do VMware Tunnel, right, which does per app VPN, because that was perceived to be the modern way for apps on various devices to connect in, because it reduces the security exposure of tunneling the whole device. To be fair, a lot of organizations that I go into still want that per device VPN. They haven't quite got to the point where they trust the device or the user not to tunnel it through into the organization and then back out again through their Blue Coat proxies or whatever it is they choose to use. So we recognize that, and Tunnel actually now has the ability to do full device VPN on Windows and Mac, which is quite good on Mac because arguably Mac has the weaker DLP stance versus Windows and other platforms, just because the OS and the way it functions, Apple haven't provided a lot of that capability yet. And also, that tunnel, if you want to use it for tunneling, you don't have to be a workstation managed device anymore. So on Windows and Mac, the tunnel client can be, you can authenticate and register and have tunnel policies pushed out for it, even though you're managing it with another solution. So I guess in that space, we go up against the Palo Altos and that of the world that have their own VPN solutions. But But then Tunnel's grown up even more than that. So cloud networking and security, so SASE is becoming the sort of talking point in the network landscape right now. So we've seen SD-WAN solutions that require you to have a physical box, and that box creates a link to a point of presence somewhere around the planet, so it gravitates to the best performing point of presence. And we have that SD-WAN solution, but if I've got a laptop, why do I want a box that I've got to carry around that needs main supply to enable me to do that secure access anywhere? So Tunnel now can actually be used as a software-based solution to connect to our VMware SASE POPs. So we have them all around the globe. The Tunnel will connect in, we'll work out what its quickest route is with the lowest latency, lowest jitter, etc. And we establish a connection. And those POPs are highly connected, right? So they have high connectivity to all of the major cloud providers. And fundamentally what that allows us to do is create a performant connection to the various SaaS resources. And in doing so, we can actually go through and we can dynamically route the connectivity that we need to provide. So if it's an Office 365 connection, we can dynamically route to Azure. There may be other services which are not business critical. We may choose to route those directly. We could choose to route them internally if we wanted to in the traditional way. And we're going to have a bunch of untrusted ones which we can choose to block. But when we get to the trusted connections, there's also another dynamic that's involved there, which is what am I actually consuming through that service? Okay, I've managed to get this connection to the service, it's been permitted, but then am I downloading documents or other such material that maybe I shouldn't be because I'm coming in from a BYO device versus a managed device, or maybe my device isn't compliant, so actually I want to cut down the access that a user has. And so baked into that SASE POP, we have a CWS, Cloud Web Security Module. And that Cloud Web Security Module allows us to do traffic introspection. Okay, so we can take a look, we can actually decode, it might be an HTTPS connection. We can choose in the POP to decode that, to look at the content that's within it, rip out stuff or block it if necessary, and then re-encode it. So basically, when you hit a website like office365.com, we will actually decode it, and then we will recreate that HTTPS stream, and you'll get like a certificate that's issued that is from VMware. So it still look like it's signed and everything and legit. It just so happens that it's been decrypted on the way. And that enables us to put a bunch of rules in place where we can start to look at the content and rip out things like videos or certain documents or content from that stream. And this starts to give the user added protection, okay, as they go through. It also adds to data loss prevention. So, certain documents might be internally confidential and come from certain locations. So we can tag that, and then we can react to it on the fly, as well as protecting us from malware, okay? So if the user just happens to surreptitiously go to a page, talk to the bottom about, various web content, users are users. They will browse to something at some point that throws an ad up that then does X, Y, Z and has a knock-on effect. So from a corporate device, do we choose to block that? Or do we choose to let it go and just make sure that we've got the right protection in the background to mitigate the risk? So zero trust isn't, you don't have to wholesale go into it. It's very much like the Workspace ONE ecosystem as it is today isn't necessarily a rip and replace, okay? All the elements, or most of the elements that we have within the Workspace ONE suite of unified endpoint management, you can phase them across, phase them in, as and when other software licenses expire. We don't have to do this big bang approach. And the same is true of zero trust, right? It's a journey. No one's ever going to rip it out and just wholesale pivot over time, because there's a lot of building blocks that need to be in place. So from a device management perspective, you know, you're all managing devices. Maybe you're not all managing them with the same tooling, and you've got to write a bunch of glueware or have some integration points to give you that wholesale visibility across it to feed into a zero trust compliancy model. But we can do all that from the cloud, so it doesn't matter where you are. Most of these sort of solutions, intelligence, in fact, is all cloud-based. We can do some on-prem connectivity for it back to the cloud, but fundamentally it is a cloud service. So if you hate cloud, a little bit between a rock and a hard place. We can like lifecycle and move to passwordless authentication through certificates. You know, Tunnel and UAG, we can use those to do the validation as you connect in, that you're coming from a device, and we can use certificates for the authentication when you connect to Tunnel, along with the DLP and the device attestation. Isn't easy to say at 9 in the morning. Conditional access, you know, like, do you have an identity provider that can consume certificates as a way of authentication? Can it go off to an MDM solution and look up the device compliance? Typically, those things only happen when you are the vendor that manages the authentication product, the IDP, and the UEM. But there are ways. We have APIs to do it. Okta consume those, so they can come and look at device compliance from Workspace ONE. I think Ping do as well. Because, you know, everyone's got an established footprint of an identity provider, right? And we do some integrations to be able to go off to the Pings and Oktas of the world and pull them in, pull the apps, the SaaS apps that they've got defined into our unified catalog and surface those alongside the device native apps that you might have for Mac or Windows or iOS, and the Horizon sessions that you might be using for VDI, or indeed Citrix sessions. You know, it's a one-stop shop when they come in to that app store. And we can put the same authentication mechanisms around all of those. And even broker between the different identity providers. So create a relationship, trust relationship effectively, if you will, between the identity providers so we can hand off to one another. And that all pertains to the user experience, right? No one wants to know that I have to use Ping and this and that behind the scenes. It should all be transparent to the user. And then that tunnel and proxies, so you know, all of this and the elements we talked about in the SASE POP of being able to do this traffic introspection, DLP controls on that traffic, doing least privileged capabilities. This all plays into that security model as well, because there are going to be residuals of on-prem stuff that needs to be accessed. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to do a tunnel to a unified access gateway. Actually, the SASE POP can route back to internal as well. So it can be like a one solution to rule them all if you want, from a remote access and network security perspective. And the risk analytics, you know, hackers are getting smarter and smarter, right? In the way that they try and penetrate organizations. And so understanding like user behavior and when stuff starts to drift out of the norm is going to be important, okay? Because humans are fallible, and we are the weakest link in the security chain. And so understanding our behavior and reacting to it proactively is going to be a big thing. And then like the last bit is the automatic remediation and orchestration of responses to threats and changes in the landscape, okay? As well as helping, let's say, with our day-to-day tasks, not having to hit F5 on a bunch of reports every now and then going off and reacting, or maybe having to munge a bunch of data in Excel from different sources, right? There's the whole thing about a unified platform, is that you haven't got to take some data from SCCM, some data from another provider, and bring them all together, correlate them, and then go off and formulate a response. You can just create your business practices off one solution and react accordingly. That brings us neatly on to like automation, right? No one likes to do these repetitive tasks. You know, I always got told when I was an admin that I was lazy, but it was a good thing apparently, because I only ever did something once, and if I knew I was going to have to do it again, I wrote a script. or wrote an app, and I was done, and drove my efficiency apparently, but didn't really like being called lazy. But it's the nature of the beast, right? You know, when I was doing SCCM, we were always having to go and capture additional data points from a machine, and going, if anyone's edited a MOF file before, it's not the greatest thing in the world. But these days, it's a lot simpler. So we have, in Workspace ONE, sensors. And sensors are like custom inventory points, right? I want to go out to a bunch of machines, selectively target them maybe pull in like what the AV definitions that I'm running. Have I got this bit of software on it? Is this value set on the machine? And report that back. A, so that I can visualize it in a report, but B, so maybe I can take actions based upon the result that comes back. So sensors is in there. You can lift and shift your scripts that you may have in another product, because typically they're in Bash, Python, or ZSH. So lift them in. You can execute those in a system or user context. So, the product itself is elevate and write where necessary. So we can go and look at system bits, or we can look at, specific thing for a user. Hoover in those values or those results, be it Boolean, date, time, string, or integer. And then the editor's got syntax highlighting. You can just hit import, and we'll see this in action in a minute, actually, in the demo, because I've got a demo. You can also use that consume environment variables in that script. So I'm not talking about like environment variables from the machine. I'm talking about environment variables that sit in UEM. So in Workspace ONE UEM, when we bring across your identity from AD, we can bring across certain attributes, username, email address, object GUIDs, groups that you're in, etc. And you can pass those into the script dynamically. So we will securely store them and securely push them down along with the script so it can ingest them and consume them. And then we do granular targeting through smart groups. So our smart groups let you, go through a pick list of attributes to build a list of devices or users that you can then target. So subsets of the organization, even be based off AD groups if necessary. And then all that data comes into that intelligence engine. So we saw in the intelligence, one of those ingestion points that we have is sensor data. And as soon as sensor data changes from machine, it can trigger a workflow or activity off the back that can then go out and remediate or take action based on the value. And then if we wrote sensors that can push scripts down that just inventory stuff, then logical next step is just to push sensors, equivalent of sensors down, but a script that can effect a change on the machine. So same UI, and these two elements, scripting and sensors, are available on Mac and Windows. Sensors is actually available on Linux as well right now, and I suspect scripting is coming very shortly. So, all the way through this product, we're trying to give you feature parity as a Mac admin with what the Windows guys have and what the Linux guys have, and vice versa, right? There are some nuances where, platforms don't support certain things. But where possible, we're trying to make the UI look the same. It's BitLocker and File Vault. Okay, well, it's disk encryption, so let's go through and surface it to you in the same way, let you control it in the same way. And it's the same with scripting, okay? So system or user execution context, syntax highlighting during edit. Same granular targeting. Here, you're typically doing something slightly different though, because sensors are just going out and executing maybe on a set cadence, or when the machine reboots or user logs on, those types of activity. With scripting, it can be automated, just like when we push an app or a profile out. It can be automated, in which case it just happens in real time, or it can be user initiated. So let's call it self-service, but I can go into the app catalog, I can personalize this script with a description of how I want it to look in, or name of how I want it to look in the catalog, a description of how it should appear so the user know what it is, and then an icon that makes it look different than just a script. I can even put categories against it, so if the user searches in the catalog, it'll come back, maybe I call it utilities, or IT scripts, or IT admin stuff, support, Users can easily find it. Users can execute it. If it's system side, we'll elevate it. So custom names and descriptions. So super flexible, just makes it look like any other app. Not doing too bad for time. And the workflow automation takes these elements and starts allowing you to automate those BAU activity tasks and responses. So sensor changes, comes in, effectively got an if that, then this type of response that I can do. So could be just based off a report, hit the action button, choose like this sensor value equals disabled and I want to go and enable it. I can actually, in this part, we can integrate with other systems. So we can integrate with ServiceNow and Slack out of the box and email. But there's a bunch of REST APIs that you can call or use to call REST APIs in other products if you want to effect a change somewhere else and trigger another workflow. Some of the ones that we have are like battery health on my laptop goes south of 70%. We'll go off, raise a ServiceNow ticket to get a new battery sent to the user before they even know. Okay, it's like battery gets ordered, sent to the user, email goes out saying there's a new battery arriving for you. So it's proactive, and this all helps with your NPS score, right? And then the last bit is deployment orchestration. So this came more from the Windows side of the world, because in the Windows side of the world, there's often a bunch of dependencies between applications. There's a specific install order. Okay, you know, VC runtimes need to be down before I install my app. But in other ecosystems, that's less of a thing. But there are intertwining dependencies that can sometimes happen where I deploy an app, and once I've deployed the app, I want to configure it and change a plist file or whatever. So we use this as if you've ever used SCCM task sequences, it's very, very similar to that. You can have an ordered, sequential list of actions that can be install a profile, run a script, install applications. You can install them in parallel or serial, depending on how you want to attack that problem. So think of an onboarding event, right? So when I onboard my device, I get, we've got the equivalent of Det Notify now baked into the product. So I get this onboarding experience. It tells me the apps that are coming down. I might want to control that. I might want to give the user access to Chrome, for instance, because it's our default browser of choice. Lets them get up and running and connected with some of their SaaS apps, while in the background we can prioritize and install maybe Outlook or another product for email, and like start prioritizing the way those go down. You know, drop the app, deploy the plist to configure it, maybe kick off a script to do some synchronization or update to it if necessary, if that's what it takes. So it's super powerful in the way that we do onboarding. You know, some of the time I've seen this used for doing like CIS benchmarks, okay? So, you know, CIS publish a bunch of benchmarks. Typically, they've got the scripts in there to affect the change on the device and how to measure it. So sensors can measure it, a script can change it. Here, I can do an if sensor says false, execute script. Okay, so I can go through and effectively do a whole CIS benchmark in this drag and drop canvas. So that becomes really powerful as an admin tool for responding to events where I need to sequence bits together. So I've got a quick demo. It might be wasted on you because my eyesight's pretty poor, but it will go full screen. So this is going to take you through, and you'll just see how we can quickly create a sensor. So you see it's Mac OS and Linux. There's the options for sensor. Then go through, give it my name. As luck would have it, CIS is one of the benchmarks we're going to do. So choose my scripting method of choice, the context with which I want to do it, and the value I want to get back. Cut and paste. So just going to do disabled or enabled as a return string. Could have done this as a Boolean, but I was lazy. You can see in the environment variables that we hoover in, or you can hoover in and send to the script as it executes. So things from device GUIDs, UUIDs, etc. And then I can go and target this selectively out to population. Here I'm just being lazy again. Seems to be a theme, right? All devices, but I can choose whether I want to run this periodically, maybe like every couple of hours, at login, at reboot, at log off. And then I've got a sensor, and that's deployed out, and that's start inventorying back. Same thing again, scripts, Mac OS or Windows. This one's just going to be one that sets the host name. Again, short and sweet. I give it a name, how it's going to appear in the catalog, not that you'd normally service it. I tag it as a utility. I could choose to change the icon if I wanted to. And then again, context, scripting methodology, and there's my script. It's just going to append demo underscore my username. So here we're going to consume the username so that the device gets tagged as the user. I save that, and then I can choose again to assign it out to either a bunch of users. I could have one for different parts of the organization if I wanted to, different scripts so that, maybe finance gets tagged different to HR. I could run this periodically, but probably best run this one at startup maybe so the machine name takes effect. And that's like scripting and sensors. And the last part is freestyle orchestrator. So let's take some of those components that we just created, put them into a flow. So getting a new Mac. So again, you see Mac and Windows. iOS and Android are coming soon, actually, on this one. Target against all devices. So anytime a device enrolls, it's automatically going to get this. First thing I'll do is, what did I do? Did this about 1 o'clock this morning. We're going to run a script. So we're going to set the host name. That's the first thing we're going to do. Yep. So I choose the script that I just created. So you can see the script there. You can actually do a script dynamically and cut and paste it in here if you want to. I'm going to create a group. So a group allows parallel execution of multiple tasks. So here I'm just going to deploy a couple of bits of software that don't have a dependency order. Git desktop for some reason, and Chrome browser, I guess. Happy days. And then off the back of that, I can then go and deploy a profile. So I'm going to go through and configure Chrome so that when it hits a certain URL, it presents the certificate that's published down to my box. So that I just get SSO straight into that site using certificate-based authentication. And then last bit is I'll do a bit of if-then-this logic. So I'll do a check for remote login being disabled. So using the sensor value that's come back from inventory, actually it will trigger the running of that script to evaluate it during this as well. So is the remote login disabled? Is remote login enabled? Because I want to disable it, right? So, and then I can say, right, now I'm going to run this script. Basically what I've done is, okay, so I've done this sudo new Mac, but effectively I've done an ordered set of executions that's going to happen when I onboard my new Mac. Get the device compliant with the benchmarks, host name, and a bunch of software installed in an order that I'm happy and comfortable with, so I know it comes out of the back of the process as I expect it. So that's published, and that's freestyle scripts and sensors in a nutshell. Just leave you with some partner resources. You might struggle to scan the QR code from a distance, but there is like a VMware macOS badge, like a mini training course exam type thing that's all free that you can go and do if you want to. So that's available. VMware Tech Zone is where everything around Workspace ONE, UEM, access, intelligence is all published. So if you want to get down and dirty with the details, then Tech Zone is your friend. The scripts and sensors that you saw, we actually maintain a GitHub page where there's a bunch of samples for Windows, Mac, Linux, probably some Chrome stuff there as well, because there's other elements that are in there like profiles and custom payloads and stuff. So we maintain the EUC samples page, which is a really handy resource. And then VMware Apple User Group, EMEA. So some of you might remember Joe McDonald and Adam Matthews, who were VMware before and have looked after this event. They were our Apple SMEs inside VMware for Europe. I've moved over from doing the Windows SME team and doing the Apple team now as well instead. And I'm looking to resurrect the VMware Apple user group. Been working with some colleagues in Apple UK and actually across Europe to try and arrange some times and dates for the first kickoff of that. So if you're interested, if you're a Workspace ONE customer and you're interested in coming to that and discussing all things Apple with a bunch of people knowledgeable in the subject, then swing by the depersonalized booth up there, and I'll be sure to add you to the list. We can have a chat and introduction in the meantime as well. So, for once, my timing's probably not too bad, given I've been so out of practice. Bang on the 50. Any questions? You're feeling brave? Shoot.
Oh, sorry. What about bring your own devices?
Sure. So, within Workspace ONE, across the board, we have the concept of corporate shared BYO. Okay. So, when you target profiles and scripts out, you can treat BYO devices differently than corporate assets. Okay, because fundamentally, there's certain things you can choose to do on a corporate device that maybe you won't on a BYO, but you need to adjust the experience accordingly, which is where the conditional access side of things come in. So you're coming in from a BYO device, therefore maybe there's certain SaaS services that we just don't present to you in the catalog, or that we maybe choose to treat differently in the SaaS EPOP, right? So we can do both. Obviously, the challenge around DLP on a Mac becomes a bit more difficult in a BYO Mac way, but in iOS and Android, and to some extent Windows, it's pretty easy. I saw another hand up. Come on.
Would be in the middle.
You're going to keep you fit.
Which of the products are suitable for MSPs and small businesses, if any of them?
Anything's suitable. We do specific SKUs in the Workspace ONE landscape, like essentials, that give you cut down capabilities. So we do different things for different tiers. So the intelligence stuff that I talked about is actually in our highest tier. Because you're not necessarily going to want to do all of that if you've only got 10 devices, right? If you've got 500,000, like some of our customers, then it's anything that reduces the pain, the better. So there are different SKUs. If you want to swing by, we can go through the matrix. There's a matrix online, actually, that I can share with you that pretty much goes through the different SKUs and what the capabilities are. But there's more like an essentials for managing Windows and Mac devices that sits slightly above what it takes for mobile, really, because it's a bit more intricate. You've got scripting and stuff that, is a bit of an overhead. Make sense? Any more? Time for one more. One more sprint.
Always in the middle. I always sit in the middle.
Hi. Earlier you mentioned remote access to devices, and one of the platforms was iOS. Just wondering how you do that with Workspace ONE. How do you remotely access that?
Yeah, so VMware, Workspace ONE Assist is the product. Okay, it's it's an add-on for Workspace ONE, but can be bought separately. Not all platforms are created equal. So the Assist product does work on all the different platforms, okay, and lets you fundamentally remote in and view the screen. I think in every platform other than iOS, you can actually remote control and click and interact with that screen instead of the user. I think iOS, from memory, is the only one where the Apple privacy controls don't enable that. Like Windows, you can launch a registry editor remotely and touch the registry and a command prompt. Mac, you've got terminal that you can do, and you can fire up effectively like Finder remotely and stuff and browse the file system and download files, push files to them on most of those products. So there's a bunch of capabilities that are built into it. But yeah, I think iOS, the only thing you can't do is interact. We try and keep everything like the features and functionality where possible, give you the same across all the different platforms, so you're not having to change your business processes for each different one. You treat them all equally. That's the killer bit. Okay, I think we're good for time. Like I say, myself and a couple of colleagues will be at the depersonalized booth due to FedEx talent failure. So, yeah, look forward to interacting with you all. Have a great day.